What does it really mean to be lost in the dark? To find yourself wandering endless hallways, not knowing which way is forward or back? If you can't even remember what you look like, how are you supposed to remember what the hallways looked like? How are you supposed to find your way out of yourself? How do you win when the labyrinth you're inside of is yourself?
Look, I don't know, man, but I do know that this place is big as hell. Oh my god, I have been stuck in here for 4 hours! 4 hours! Anybody? 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 Jack!
Hey there, fellow entities. Alaric here. If you're wondering where I've been all this time, well, now you know. I went to go grab a Dr. Pepper from the fridge and straight through the floor. Great stuff. In my time down here, though, I did manage to find a flat screen TV just sort of fused into the wall. So it's actually been kind of a great week, because I got to watch the Backrooms movie, and Deltarune's only a week away! So, in keeping with the common theme of the channel, this video is a fusion of two very odd special interests that I've found have a lot more in common than you might think. So join me, my fellow freaks made of furniture, on a journey of philosophy, self-improvement, and media analysis, as we discover how it is that Captain Clark is the Knight. But first, some clarifying context. Clarifying context! This video is going to be going into full-on spoiler territory for the Backrooms film by the youngest director ever created on the face of this earth, the 20-year-old Kane Parsons, as well as the entirety of chapters 1 through 4 of Deltarune. So if you haven't played the full game or watched the full movie, do your due diligence, watch them, and then come back. Okay, for those of you who are either too lazy or too busy, I understand, to watch or play either of them, here's the quick breakdown of what we're looking at, alright? If you already know both stories, skip to this timestamp to watch the dailies. Okay, bye. In the Backrooms, we follow Clark, a depressed, disillusioned alcoholic who runs a failing furniture store, Captain Clark's Ottoman Empire. Wait, I just realized that that's a pun. Ottoman furniture store? Oh my god, it's genius! Anyway, one day after a long night of binge drinking, the lights in his store suddenly start turning on and flashing again, which has been happening for a while now. Going down to the basement, he tries to fix it with the breaker, only to find a light shining through a crack in the wall, but only at a certain angle. Going up to it, he finds an emptiness, a space between spaces that leads him through to the Backrooms. A seemingly infinite liminal space filled with warped furniture and even more warped creatures. As Clark spirals further out of control, he eventually comes into contact with Captain Clark, a warped version of himself who he seems to develop some sort of symbiosis with. While we're not given a lot of information on how exactly their relationship formed and what they're doing down there, it's very clear that the Backrooms acts as the push Clark needed to fall down his own mental rabbit hole, to become consumed by himself. And well, he then is literally consumed by himself. For the majority of the movie, though, Captain Clark is this shadowy figure in the background, noises in other rooms, a shape in the darkness, something intangible that we as the audience don't really understand. But towards the end of the film, we get to see him in his entirety, and we understand him so deeply that you almost feel bad for the thing. And in this video, we're going to go in depth as to why that is. On the flip side, we have Deltarune, sister game slash sequel slash prequel slash to Undertale. Deltarune follows Chris, our protagonist, as they and Susie find the Dark World, a strange, esoteric space between spaces that is a world where inanimate objects come to life and become sentient beings based on the perception of people in the so-called light world, or the normal world. Throughout the entire narrative, they are haunted by the figure of the Night, a completely unknown figure who has been manipulating events in the Dark World to bring about the Roaring, aka the end of the world. As the story continues, we learn through various subtle hints and scenes that Chris is actually working alongside the Night in some way, and there are a lot of strange parallels between them, their actions, their appearance, their attitudes. While Deltarune isn't yet complete and we do not yet know the identity of the Night, I think it's undeniably safe to say that Chris and the Night are meant to be idyllic parallels, which again, we'll get into more later. I hope just hearing the plotline between these two pieces of media immediately makes you see the connection. Morally dubious protagonist accidentally finds a strange, warped reality in which their negative impulses are rewarded, and the seemingly shadowy antagonistic force of the story is, at least in some way, a version of themselves. But that's only the surface level comparison. So come on down and join me in the dark. Let's begin.
Part 1.
Perception informing your world. To answer your immediate question, no, the Night is not literally Captain Clark. Like, I don't think he's just like going into another franchise, you know what I'm saying? No, rather what I mean is that Captain Clark and the Night spiritually serve the same purpose in their respective stories. But to understand how it is that they serve that purpose, we need to understand the context of the world in which they both exist, and how they both use perspective as a vehicle to drive their stories forward. Let's start with a question. How is it that you know you are in a world to begin with? How is it that you know that you are sitting in a chair, that you are looking at your phone or computer screen right now watching this video? What is it that is giving you the information necessary for you to say, I'm here right now? I'm in this space. There are a number of possible answers as to how our perception really works, and philosophers have been going back and forth about these ideas for as long as people could yap around a campfire. Deltarune and The Backrooms are both very intentionally crafted to be stories about perception, but whether or not the philosophies I bring up today are actually intentional is completely up for grabs. The only people who actually know this are Kane Parsons and Toby Fox, and sadly, I don't have enough clout just yet to call them up. Oh, wait, hold on, I gotta take this. Hey, Tony, how you doing, man? Yeah, I know Rudy's supposed to be the Night. I'm just, it's for the thumbnail and, like, they're thematically tied, you know what I mean? Yeah, okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're killing it with Chapter 5. Yeah, I can't wait to see Shogun Asgore. Yeah, that's gonna be sick. All right, I gotta go. Yeah, I'm recording. All right, I'll see you. Sorry about that, folks. That was my cousin, Tony. Haven't talked to him for a while, so... Let's talk about the French. This beautiful specimen right here is René Descartes, also known as the father of modern philosophy. Now, you might not know this guy by looking at him or by name, but you almost certainly know of his work. Ever heard of a squared plus b squared equals c squared? Well, he didn't come up with that, but he did come up with the notation of using x for stuff, which also isn't used in that equation. But whatever, the point is that this guy is the reason for modern analytic geometry, so he would probably fucking hate the Backrooms. Especially since the Backrooms themselves perfectly capture one of his primary philosophies, representationalism. Also known as indirect realism, this philosophy posits that we do not directly perceive the world around us, but rather we take in the physical space through senses that are filtered by our ideas, our sensations. This is in contrast to the philosophy of direct realism, which posits that we are literally perceiving physical objects exactly as they are, rather than making any form of interpretation of it. To give an example of the difference between the two, let's say two individuals are both looking at the same brown chair. Following the philosophy of direct realism, both of them are looking at and seeing the exact same chair in physical space. Under representationalism, however, each of them is going to see that chair slightly differently based on their own predisposition, their feelings, their ideas about the chair. One of them might think it's uncomfortable and the other might think it's very comfortable, and so they both see it a little bit differently. Direct realism posits that the chair and your feelings about the chair are two separate things existing at the same time, whereas representationalism collides the two, Your seeing of the chair then gets filtered through your feelings about the chair to form your perception, and that perception is going to end up being unique on a person-by-person basis. So, what does this have to do with an infinite sprawling space filled with moldy carpets? Well, everything, actually. The Backrooms is this infinite space that is trying to remember the spaces of reality. As Clark puts it, though, it misremembers these spaces, as well as misremembering people. The entities in the Backrooms, known as still lifes, are copies of actual people that exist in the real world that are remembered incorrectly. They are sentient misrepresentations of character, false perceptions. Have you ever met someone and thought they were attractive, handsome, beautiful, but then learned to dislike them because of their attitude or the way they carry themselves, and all of a sudden you find that person deeply unattractive? Their physical appearance starts to seem uglier to you, but their face hasn't actually changed. Your perception of them has. The Backrooms is doing that over and over and over unto infinity, which is why still lifes like the representation of Clark's ex-wife has like 4 faces sprawled horizontally. It's symbolic of how Clark, or the world at large, saw her as a person. Are the faces going from left to right meant to represent the blurring of her face shaking from left to right saying no to Clark? Is it meant to represent what she might have looked like after he abused her? Or is it meant to represent that to Clark, she was a two-faced person? She wasn't real to him. She didn't actually mean as much to him as he thought she meant. And she only really meant something to him when she was gone, when he didn't have control over her anymore. This all ties back to René Descartes' biggest philosophical question, the mind-body problem. Are the mind and the body one in the same, or are they rather two separate entities? Because if our memories are a physical interaction, how can we say that what we perceive is any different from reality? How can we say that a thought of something happening is not the physical action of that thing happening? While the grounded scientific explanation is that we have a complex series of neurons all firing electricity between each other, creating signals to create images in our minds while our physical bodies don't experience the event because it doesn't exist outside of ourselves, the philosophical answer is much more open-ended, let's say. The Backrooms is a physical manifestation of the mind-body problem taken to its most extreme negative. Try to, in your mind, imagine your childhood bedroom right now. I can guarantee you are getting details wrong. That the lighting came from a slightly different angle, that your window was a little bit lower than you thought it was, that your desk was actually in the other corner. You just didn't remember that time you moved it with your mom. In daily practice, our memories being slightly different from what really happened isn't a problem because you aren't actively combing through every single section of the memory. But to make that manifest into a physical space, to put you one-to-one in direct contact with everything you don't remember about your own life, is to make you question everything about yourself. And this is exactly why the Backrooms acts as a psychological phenomenon as much as a physical phenomenon. Because by separating the mind and the body into a physical space, you, in a weird way, force anyone who enters to connect their mind to their body. The section of the Backrooms that we see in the film is a direct mirror to Clark's life and is reflecting his own mind-body problem. The very first thing he sees as he enters is a massive pile of furniture, most of which is either fused in on each other or at strange angles in a large pile. That's literally Clark's life, a massive mess of furniture that he can't get rid of. All of it amounting to what? Is it art? Is it purpose? No, it's just nothing. It means nothing. And it's why the first time he leaves the Backrooms, he has to take a stool sample. Not just because that's also a pun. I see you, Kane, you funny little man. But also because that stack of furniture is who he sees himself as. And it is the store that it is connected to. A massive heap of pointless furniture. The second landmark we see is the backwards stop sign, and while the obvious thing that this is supposed to mean is, yeah, stop exploring the backrooms, it's bad down here, don't go any further, it actually means a lot more. I have two readings of the backwards stop sign. First, the stop sign is in reverse because the backrooms welcomes Clark. As Clark himself says near the end of the movie, this is where he feels like he belongs the most. This is where he feels the most wanted, the most appreciated. As an architect who presumably has never built a building, Clark gets to have a unique relationship to the backrooms as someone who appreciates it specifically for its artistic purpose. Clark sees the backrooms like a living painting, a sentient work of art that he wants to chart out and learn as much about as possible. And I think the backrooms on some level knows this, and it knows that Clark is going to love it back. My second reading is that the stop sign is in reverse because Clark does not know how to stop the actions that are leading him down his negative pathways. A reoccurring theme across the entire film is that people fall into patterns, into loops, that they repeat themselves over and over and over, and that the only way to progress, to change, is to be willing to accept that you are looping and step outside of that loop. Clark can't stop looping, though. Throughout the whole film, he's repeating phrases, repeating his alcoholism. He repeats the night that his wife left him over and over and over in his mind, and eventually physically. And ultimately, Clark doesn't know how to stop being the person that he is so that he could be somebody better. Clark is not a purely evil person. He's not the bad guy. He's a flawed person, someone who is very deeply unwell and knows they're unwell. And while he is trying to put in an effort to change through therapy, Clark does not have an environment that is supportive of his growth and development. And Clark isn't willing to leave the environment he's in to go somewhere better, which is why ultimately where he's at is on him. It is his own fault because he has the means, he has the knowledge, he has the skill to leave the environment he's in to pursue something better, but he's afraid. If he's not accepted here, where he's quote unquote supposed to be, where will he be accepted? The answer he finds is under the ground. It's no coincidence then that the next thing he sees after these two landmarks is the caveman holding a stick playing the Greetings in 55 Languages from NASA's Voyager, followed shortly by his own first encounter with his counterpart, Captain Clark. Wow, that was kind of a tongue twister, huh? Captain Clark immediately destroys the caveman figure and bursts through the door in the room next to Clark, representing again how Clark's underlying problem is his inability to connect with the people around him outside of anger and control. Because later in the film, when we see Mary go through the exact same spaces Clark went through, Clark has moved all of the furniture around in order to block off doorways and exits to guide her towards the mural he painted on the walls. The backroom spoke to him through its architecture, and so he attempts to speak back, both to Mary and to the walls themselves. This is exactly why the time skip between Clark's section of the film and Mary's section of the film is so important, because he's not really crazy in the sense that he's completely lost control of himself. He's crazy in the sense that he is fully indulging in all of these subconscious negative traits that he's had his whole life. His need for control over other people has extended to the point of him controlling all of the still lifes, making them act on his behalf, or his extreme ego coming out in him forcing Mary to go through the role play of the night Barbara left him, even while a version of her is standing right behind him. Like he's trying to teach her a lesson, despite knowing full well she isn't actually real. The backrooms separated Clark's mind from his body through its own actions. Why do you think it is that the first thing the backrooms does when it copies a room with windows or doors is that it seals those windows and doors if they were going outside? Because it wants you to stay in the exact same place. It wants you to stay inside of it, and it wants you to go down your own pathways over and over and over. The backrooms is just like dementia, forcing you to re-experience things slightly differently, slightly off, warping your memories and making you lose your sense of self. only accepting the pieces of you that it wants you to accept. Comparing this to the dark world from Deltarune, we also get a reality that is based on warped perception. However, it takes a different form philosophically. Whereas the Backrooms is evil and French, representing René Descartes' representationalism in its darkest form, the dark world is a more subtle evil, a German evil. No, not that kind of German. I mean, Immanuel Kant, representing transcendental idealism. Trans, Deltarune, huh? It just works. In his infamous book, Critique of Pure Reason, Kant separates the world into two factors, phenomena and noumena. Noumena are things in themselves, the literal objects. To bring back the brown chair from earlier, the chair itself is the noumena. The phenomena is how we are experiencing the chair. So you sitting in it and feeling whether it's comfortable or not. The sensation of putting your hand on the wood, that is the phenomena. Deltarune's dark world takes people's perceptions of objects and turns them into living beings based on those perceptions. In Deltarune, the noumena are the lighteners and the phenomena are the darkeners. The literal people of the world who actually exist are able to journey to and talk to their own perceptions of reality. The dark world represents Kantian idealism made literal, in the same way that the Backrooms represents a literal form of Descartes' representationalism. I can think of no better example for this than Tenna, Mr. Antenna's TV Time. That entire thing is made up. He made that up. That wasn't like a real thing. It was Chris's perception of their own television that became that. It's so interesting that Tenna wants Chris's approval, that Tenna is desperate to be seen as equal to Chris, that Tenna feels the divorce of Toriel and Asgore seemingly as much as Chris does, when Tenna is, to some degree, an extension of Chris's underlying feelings. We don't get a lot out of Chris as a character and as a protagonist because they are silent and because they are actively against us. But knowing that Chapter 3 was created by Chris opening the fountain in the living room means that every single thing inside of Chapter 3 is representing the psychology, the phenomena that Chris has experienced over the course of their life. Chris has underlying trauma and anxiety about their parents being divorced, and every couple inside of the dark world has some sort of horrible relationship issue going on. That's not by accident. That's the phenomena of what relationships look like in Chris's mind. In the Spam Tenna video essay, which you should go watch after this, check it out, click it, please, please. We talked about how Spamton and Tenna are tragic yaoi and how that relates back to Japanese history. In relationship to Chris directly, it's a representation of their own experience with divorce and with broken relationships. Everyone in the light world that Chris looks up to has a broken relationship. Asgore, Toriel, Rudy, Carol. They have all either fallen out of love or disconnected with one another. The only happy family we actually see is the Caddy family, who Chris doesn't seem to be very close to anymore. This is also the direct reason as to why the Dark Worlds are simultaneously extremely dangerous, but really quite safe for our protagonists, because Chris sees themselves as someone who is deeply dangerous, someone treacherous, someone who is going behind people's backs, but at the same time, they do genuinely love Susie and Ralsei. So if Chris got to create an entire world for themselves, why wouldn't it be a world where those two are always safe, even when things go wrong? The literal only time that the party is in actual danger in any of the first couple chapters is when something is not going according to what seems to be Chris's plan. Spamton and Jevil are both optional and seemingly completely out of the way of Chris's original plan. They are dangerous. They were not accounted for. The knight showing up at the end of Chapter 3 was very clearly not planned for by Chris or the knight, because the knight was supposed to just take Toriel and bounce. Instead, they're forced to act an impromptu fight and run the ones for no reason other than, if we don't play this up in front of Susie, things are gonna get bad. And the only actually dangerous Dark Worlds are the ones in Chapter 4, which weren't opened by Chris, and Susie was scared of Gerson having died at the time, so she wasn't exactly thinking straight while making making it. The Dark Worlds are whimsical and exciting and beholden to the prophecy because whoever is opening the fountains believes that to be the world. It is their perspective that is being imparted to create the creatures of the Dark World. Susie's Dark World is only so similar to the world before it because that's how she saw it. She's creating a memory of it. Much like the Backrooms, her creation of the second Dark World in Chapter 4 is just slightly off color, slightly off tilt, and doesn't act in the exact same way that it theoretically should. Because she doesn't remember what happened even 5 minutes ago exactly the way it happened, and her perception of the Dark World is fundamentally different from Chris's and the Knight's. If Susie opened a Dark World independently, without having seen what it looked like before, it would be completely different than what it would look like if Chris opened a Dark World in the exact same spot. Because ultimately, they are different people with different phenomena, different experiences of reality that are being created as physical beings. The darkness of the world created by Susie are more violent and more sudden because Susie has experienced sudden violence all of her life. That is what she sees as quote-unquote the enemy. And this is why creatures like Friend can slip into Dark Worlds without them being an intentional part of it, because Chris remembers it even if they don't want to. This is the same reason why all of the egg rooms relate back to Chris's trauma and history prior to the events of the game, because whether or not Chris wants to grasp what happened to them, it comes out through their psychology regardless, and the Dark World will always reflect all of you. Both of these worlds do. They reflect everything about the people inside of them because they are formed by the perception of the people inside of them. You are all of you. Wow. You know, that kind of makes for a great title. What if I named the next part that? Wouldn't that be crazy?
Part 2. You are all of you. And I am all I am.
Yes, that was a Shadow the Hedgehog reference. Live with it. And while you're living that beautiful life, why don't you check out my commission page, ko-fi.com/yourboyalaric, to help support the channel. I don't got any sponsors just yet, so you know, your boy needs a little bit of breadsticks to keep this whole train running. It's been a hard 3 months, okay? Please. Or consider becoming a channel member for early access to videos, or just to support me, or, you know, whatever. Just check it out. Okay, alright, bye. Love you.
Dang, man, you sure are long-winded. What the hell did any of that have to do with Captain Clark of the Night? I have no attention span. Help!
In order to fully understand Captain Clark and the Knight as designs, you have to understand the design space of the worlds that they inhabit, because Captain Clark is a product of its environment just as much as the Knight is. I've seen many argue that Captain Clark represents all of the bad elements of Clark's psychology and personality, that it is the ego, the anger, the drinking, but I think it's more than that. I think this is all of Clark, his good and his bad combined into a single organism designed to be him, as close to him as possible. The most striking part of Captain Clark's visual design is the fact that he is a captain to begin with. Clark hated filming those commercials. He hated dressing like a pirate and gallivanting for the camera. He's not like me. I wouldn't love doing that. But why did he hate it? He hated it because he felt it didn't represent him as a person, his real personality. In his mind, he is a fucking architect.
I am a fucking architect!
He is a master of building, of creating. But in reality, he is the guy in the pirate costume on TV. Nobody else knows him as an architect, and so the world doesn't perceive him as Clark, the architect. It perceives him as Captain Clark. The only reason Async even knows that it's Clark in there is because they recognize him from the commercial. That's the only way anyone ever recognizes Clark. So of course, he's remembered in that same outfit, because to the world, that's the most impactful thing he ever did. It also represents his sense of self-importance. Pirates were well-known early cartographers, and Clark sees himself as a cartographer of the Backrooms. But don't forget, Captain Clark isn't just a pirate, he's actually a pirate king. After all, it is his Ottoman Empire, and Clark sees himself as more important than anybody else. He treats the still lifes like his subjects, and even Mary, another human being, is treated like nothing more than a peasant to him, until, of course, she criticizes him, snaps him out of that perspective, much like a jester or an advisor would snap a king out of madness. He sees people as tools by default, and while he is working to change that perspective, he ultimately fails, and so Captain Clark keeps it. Captain Clark's color scheme is also key here. Clark himself wears purple throughout the entire film, and that color purple starts off very desaturated towards the beginning of the film and becomes much more saturated as the film goes on. In the scene where he kidnaps Mary and the dinner scene, his purple shirt is significantly darker than the one he wore earlier in the movie. Why is that? We established in the Deltarune character design videos that Deltarune plays a lot with what the meaning of colors are in its color theory. Backrooms does the same thing. Purple is a color associated with both royalty and villainy, with corruption and hierarchy. As Clark falls deeper into his own psychosis, he becomes more purple, because he is a king in his mind, and he is simultaneously corrupted. It also helps that the backroom being all this yellowy green really causes Clark to contrast from the environment. Because no matter how much Clark sees himself as a part of the backrooms, he isn't. He is an alien entity to this space, as much as the entities inside of it are alien to him. Captain Clark, on the other hand, is literally born from the backrooms, and so he has that same yellow down his coat, while having the purple, the kingliness, and the corruption of the original Clark wrapped around his waist. So far, all of the color theory of Captain Clark then comes together to form a purely evil entity, right? Yellows and purples with this green contrast, blood trickling down the coat, but there's one part of the outfit that stands out as particularly odd to me, and it's why I think that Captain Clark does have the good of Clark inside of it as well. It's that bright blue. Bright blue is very rarely used to represent anything negative. Across history, it's a color that's been used to associate with magic, the sky, joy, good, right? You think the blue of Superman or classic Batman, not the blue of an evil pirate monster. The inclusion here serves two purposes. Firstly, like with Clark's purple shirt, it helps provide contrast to the environment. In the chase sequence at the end of the film, one of the first things to come into frame every time we see Captain Clark is the arms, and it's a very standout part of his design that his arms are so damn long. So having the sleeves be blue lets us see them and keep track of them much easier. It makes him stand out and feel unnatural. The other meaning to the baby blue lies in Captain Clark's behavior at the end of the film. When he's entering the dining room, he doesn't immediately gun to Clark and Mary. He doesn't try to rip them apart on the spot. He's not some mindless monster. He leans down, he considers Clark, he listens to him before he picks him up. He only consumes Clark when Clark essentially gives him permission to. By saying that she's told us we don't have to change, Clark is telling the entirety of himself that he can be the monster, that he can be something else, that he can live in the backrooms forever. And if that's the case, then there's no need for two Clarks. Captain Clark is the real Clark. It is who Clark ultimately was meant to be, because Clark was never going to really choose change. So his relationship to Mary is very interesting then, because he doesn't immediately try to grab her after killing Clark. He waits, he eats Clark, and then he seemingly drags Clark to her. If he really wanted to just kill Mary immediately, why did he drag Clark down the hallway as if to show her? When he's chasing her, he stops and slows down when they reach the furniture store. He slowly walks towards her. We know he can move faster than this. Why is he trying to engage with her like this? When she is on the ground and he's on top of her, he doesn't immediately bite down or try to grab her or anything else. He looms over her. And while she's smashing his face in with the stone, he looks in sorrow until she breaks it when he gets angry. And when she manages to finally leave, he stands in the crack and reaches out to her while wailing, crying, almost whining like she said Clark did. To me, this reads as some portion of Pirate Clark either containing the psychology of the original or having developed its own and wanting to also be saved. Because again, as much as Clark was a bad man in his actions, he was trying to be a better man in his mind. Captain Clark then, as an extension of all of who Clark was, sees Mary as his last hope at becoming something different. Because even if Clark, the real Clark, accepted that he was a monster, the monster Clark might not have necessarily accepted that. This thing has flesh and blood. It is not like the furniture of the still lifes. It is a sentient organism with desires and wants, with feelings, emotion. And that's what that baby blue to me says. It says, I'm actually alive. I'm in here. Help. And that is what makes Captain Clark so engaging, so terrifying to me. Because he's not just some monster. He's not a 8-limbed freak just trying to get you. He's not just some stick figure monster chasing you through scary yellow room. He is a representation of how all of us, as people, can become monsters of our own making, desperate to seek out help and destroying everyone around us. He is exactly what happens when a person gets lost inside themselves, inside their own back rooms. To bring us back to philosophy, or rather in this case psychology, Carl Jung had this idea of the shadow self, a component of your personality that is your blind spot. It is all your weaknesses, everything that you hate about yourself, everything you don't want to admit. Captain Clark is a manifestation of that shadow self. And in this case, the shadow self actually encapsulates the whole of who Clark was, because Clark wasn't aware of anything about himself. Clark didn't understand that his entire life, the entirety of the choices he was making, were leading to his weaknesses and his downfall. And so literally every component of his personality is his shadow. He acknowledges that he gets angry and that he pushes people away at the beginning of the film. That is his ego. His shadow is the actual cause of those things. Because while he knows that his actions have consequences, he doesn't understand the actions themselves. Captain Clark is the action made manifest, which is why it is both trying to reach out for help from Mary and trying to kill her. Because Clark, in his own mind, was doing both, whether he knew it or not. And this is what makes Captain Clark the Knight, because they are both shadows. No, this is not meant to be a literal joke about how the Knight is a shadow. I mean, I guess... Damn it! Oh my god! We keep making accidental puns, people. We gotta be put in prison. The tie is that they're both Jungian shadows. Jungian? Is that how you say it? I have no idea. You know what I mean. The Knight is Chris's shadow. Now, people, listen. Last time I made a Knight theory, everybody, was like, oh, Rudy Knight, that's crazy. I'm not literally saying that Chris's shadow is literally the Knight. Thematically, people. Thematically. I meant it for Rudy, though. Rudy Knight in 5! Watch me be right! Chris has a very hate-hate relationship with themselves, it seems. In the early chapters, they seem to struggle a lot with having conversations with Rousey, and I think that's because Rousey, being a direct creation of Chris, represents Chris's own relationship to themselves and to their older brother, Azrael. We get various hints throughout Deltarune that Chris has an inferiority complex, whether that be the game starting in their room, where we see Azrael having all of these trophies and first place awards and all this notoriety, while Chris has just their bed and a rusty cage for you. Or how easily willing they are to hurt themselves in order to remove the soul from their body. There is an underlying theme of self-harm throughout Chris's entire narrative that isn't really discussed that much, and it's one that I don't want to get too deep into here, but the fact that Susie is so willing and immediately ready to clean up blood off Chris's floor and doesn't judge them or question it at all goes to show a lot about both of their characters. In spite of their self-loathing, though, Chris does actually possess a high ego. You can see this in the way that they pose and in the way they impose their will on the world. Do you really think that someone could rip the soul of another sentient being out of themselves, throw it in a trash can, and kick it unto eternity without a sense of ego and self? Chris being a silent protagonist does not mean that they are not a fully fledged character, a very driven character with goals of their own. those goals being represented in their shadow. See, we can't learn anything from Chris directly, but we do learn from the consequences of their actions, the things that they don't want to acknowledge and don't want us to see. The Knight is the sentient form of those consequences and of that action. See the connection? Clark and Chris are facing down, respectively, the exact same character arc, just from two different philosophical perspectives. And so the consequences of their own actions, the villains in each of their stories, are representations of their shadow self, the psychology that led to those consequences. Clark perceives the world through the lens of representationalism, and so all of his memories, being warped from his own manipulative attitude and perspective, leads him down the infinite pathways of the backrooms and ultimately into his own maw. He's trapped within his own mind forever, to be consumed again and again. Chris, on the other hand, perceives the world through idealism, so the darkness that they discover within themselves becomes a sentient form, a conversation. Chris actually learns from themselves through these representations and is willing to change and develop as a result. How much that change and development will lead them away from the same fate as Clark or not is what we're going to find out in those next 3 chapters. So ultimately, what's the takeaway? Well, it's simple, folks.
Part 3! Thinking only takes you so far.
The perceived enemy of both of our protagonists is change and choice. Chris does not believe that their choices matter. This is shown throughout the entirety of the first couple chapters. As a matter of fact, it was the hook line of Deltarune when it first launched with Chapter 1, that your choices don't matter. But we've found out throughout the chapters that that is absolutely not the case, and that the choices are, if anything, the single most important part of the game. Not necessarily the player's choices, but the character's choices. Chris's choices. Clark, too, similarly believes that his choices do not matter, that it was the world that did this to him, that it was circumstance, that he was put in the place that he was at. But it was his own choices that led to opening a mediocre furniture store. It was his own choice to come home late, drunk that night, that led to his wife leaving him and him losing his own home. It was his choices that put him in that position. Captain Clark and the Knight, then, are both the same creature, the same pillar, the fear of change, and the consequence of inaction. The takeaway from both Captain Clark and the Knight, even without knowing Deltarune's conclusion, is ultimately the same. Allowing others' perception to affect your own ends up warping your world. To blame your own actions on consequences of circumstance is to be swallowed by the darkness of self. It is the destruction of all progress. The shadow of the mind is, and always will, be starving. Captain Clark and the Knight both have great gaping jaws because they are always hungry. But to feed them, to feed the shadow, is purposeless, as it will not just bite off the hand that fed it, but swallow the arm, the shoulder, and the head. The only way out of this shadow is to accept that you are lost in it. It may seem like the world is dark or that you're lost in some endless space, but the light of change is just around the corner. You just have to be willing to step through what you're currently perceiving as a wall. And what that change looks like is going to vary greatly from person to person. It's not the same for everybody, but nonetheless, you have to do it regardless of difficulty. For some of you out there, change is going to be as simple as saying no to somebody you felt anxious about. And for others, it's going to be like carrying a boulder, a Sisyphusian task of going up the mountain and back down again. And that's all right, because as hard, as painful, as endless as change is, it is a necessary component of existence. And it's the exact reason why Clark should have left the backrooms alone, and why the dark worlds need to be sealed. Because to be lost in the self is to be lost for eternity, to waste your life on an idea instead of reality. If you made it all the way to the end here, make sure you join me this Wednesday for a very special stream of Deltarune Chapter 5. You'll be able to get my live reactions to literally everything in the chapter. We'll probably be doing some theorizing after we finish it out. I'll be talking about my upcoming videos and other plans and art, and it's just going to be a good time. And if I don't see you again, thank you for supporting me. It means the world, because the change I needed to inflict on my life was making stuff like this. Have a beautiful evening, and tell someone you love them.